Like Xi Jinping isn't stupid. Vladimir Putin isn't stupid either.
Germany is preparing for a potential Russian attack on NATO within the next 2 or 3 years.
China was about to lose control of TikTok completely.
Hello everyone, my name is Alex and you're on my channel Alex from Ukraine, and today we are joined by a already regular guest, special guest, OSINT analyst, cybersecurity expert, content creator, YouTuber and author Ryan McBeth. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, buddy.
For breaking news, Russia has attacked the passenger train Barvinkovo-Lviv Chop in the Kharkiv region using drones. According to preliminary reports, the strike was carried out with 3 Shahed FPV. One hit in front of the locomotive and another struck a passenger carriage, causing a fire. How would you assess this act? It appears to be yet another instance of Russia resorting to terrorism, but what is the strategic objective behind such actions?
Well, that's a good one. I can't really say that there is any other than to cause just general terror. And there's always a non-zero chance that, well, let me put it a different way. A lot of Western nations, when you develop a weapon system, there's a dollar value to that. So you don't necessarily want to fire it indiscriminately, especially since that whole we're going to break the will of the population. That doesn't seem to be the case. There's people in Ukraine who are freaking dancing in the cold, telling Putin that he's not gonna beat them. So I kind of think that in this particular situation, this could be an intentionally targeted strike just because the Russians are evil, or it could just be you have several weapons that malfunction and they accidentally hit a rail car that they were never intended to hit. When you have this many missiles in the air and they're not that expensive, I think a Shahed style drone, or I think it's the Grom 2, they call it Grom 2? Garan 2? Oh, shoot, I can't remember now. But when you have these style weapons that are very cheap, then you might be able to afford firing them at civilian targets just because you like to see people suffer. Or you're trying to get footage, look at these people. All they have to do is just acquiesce and let us take over their country and all this will stop. So, it could either be a malfunction or it could be something intentional that was just done to create that kind of terror footage.
Additionally, in the Sumy region, Russian occupiers used FPV drones to kill 2 civilians who were attempting to evacuate from the occupied village of Grabovske. Do you believe this reflects the growing desperation and impotence of the humiliated dictator Vladimir Putin?
I don't think so. I think that Putin he's not moving chess pieces around on the ground, right? What he's doing is creating the conditions for people to set their own objectives, right? So Putin isn't telling someone, hey, fire an FPV drone at this particular location, right? But it's certainly likely that he's created this situation where commanders are authorized or they have a level of independence to go after the targets they want. And with drones so cheap, I don't want to say it makes sense to do this, but it is a more viable strategy than traditional attacks.
Mm-hmm. Another development, military columns have been observed moving toward Beijing amid rumors of an emergency within China's top leadership. Sources claim that other troop movements by the PLA across the country have been temporarily restricted. What do you think about such actions?
Well, we don't really know what's going on in China, right? Like you can speculate as much as you want, but it's a very closed society, right? So that's really a tough one. I can't definitively say what is going on or whether troops are actually being moved at all. So I hate to say I don't know, but I don't have enough information to really comment on something like that. It's just there's just not enough information there.
Ryan, in your recent video, you compared TikTok to an artillery fire control system where China received feedback on where its information shell landed. Now the Oracle controls the data and algorithms. China has lost that feedback loop, the spotter, but could China shift to area of fire instead using other platforms like
Oh,
X?
yeah. Absolutely. It's just less effective, right? So, trying to think of a way to put this. So, it's definitely less effective to fire and adjust, but you also have this situation where China was about to lose control of TikTok completely, and I think that they had their moment, right? They had their time to create this piece of software that's a weapon system, and unfortunately, it worked a little too well. And this is basically we realized this during the war, Israel's war with war in Gaza, where you have suddenly all this anti-American sentiment and anti-Israel sentiment on TikTok that just magically shows up, right? And China can dial that up or dial that down at will. And that might have just been so successful that we noticed and we essentially stopped their information war attack. And at some point, you have to say, you know what, this isn't going to work. We've been found out. So in a case like this, I think it's just China tried, and in this case, they failed. And that's kind of you can do your area of fire, but it's just going to be much less effective.
On artificial intelligence and personalization, you warned about the threat of millions of AI-generated Tucker Carlsons, each tailored to influence individual user. If TikTok, the delivery platform, is taken away from China, how do we defend against the content itself? And is America prepared for a scenario where this viral content spreads will legitimize US platforms but is generated by adversarial neural networks?
So, boy, there's a lot of questions in there. I think that it's by content. The nightmare scenario is the idea that AI can look at people's profiles and automatically generate content specifically for them, or at least for a group of people. Right now, it might not be micro-targeted for a specific person, but if you can look at somebody and go, this is their zip code, this is their likely income, this is their voting history, I'm going to create a targeted AI campaign to direct against this specific demographic. If you can do that on the fly, especially if it's something where you're generating the AI content in real time, meaning some event just came out, you have an AI avatar that has a commentary on it and it's directed out against people in that specific demographic, that's a nightmare scenario. The good news is that with the United States controlling this algorithm, if we notice that there's some sort of nefarious scheme going on, we can go to Oracle and say, what's going on? Why is there this content that's micro-targeting people? And that's not something we could do before when the algorithm is hosted in China. So we can fight that by hauling someone in front of Congress, right? And that's not the situation that we had before when China owned the whole algorithm.
You pointed out an interesting nuance. In China, a certain level of corruption is tolerated, but the outright sale of positions is a red line that is harshly punished. Xi Jinping purges aim to professionalize the military by 2027. But doesn't this create a dictator's paradox, similar to Stalin before World War II, where eliminating corrupt officials also removes independent thinkers, leaving behind one loyal but incompetent executors?
Well, that's the disadvantage of running a dictatorship, right? They know that. Like Xi Jinping isn't stupid. Vladimir Putin isn't stupid either. They know the cost of having an autocracy is what's the right word? Sycophantism, where you have people who are just telling you what you want to hear, and that is just the cost of doing business if you want to have an autocracy. So yes, you could be doing those things, but there's also the political will to obey, but also contradict. You know, there is a way to bring something up to your boss and say, "Sir, I think we should do it like this." That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get fired or you're going to get shot, but you have to be very tactful at how you bring that thing up and very careful with how you make these kinds of suggestions. So I kind of think that's the people that are corrupt. You could have people who are genuinely incompetent. You could have people who did take bribes to promote people, and in though either of those two cases, you know, those guys are going to be gone, right? Because China can't afford to screw around right now when we've got a year left until their timeline hits to be able to invade Ukraine.
In one of your recent videos, you agreed with Reagan's thesis, we win, they lose, and emphasized that losing Taiwan would mean losing the 90% of global chip production for the US. Given these purges, do you see signs that China is genuinely preparing for economic isolation? A professional army is one thing, but could China economy withstand with rupture with the West?
So that's kind of a tough one, right? Like, you know, no country can survive on its own. I mean, you look at this pencil here, right? The rubber is from Indonesia, the metal is from Estonia, the wood is from Brazil, the lead is from Georgia, like the country of Georgia, right? So it's not that America can't make a pencil. Like we don't have the manufacturing capability. We don't have the resources to make a pencil. Actually, it would probably be graphite from Georgia, not lead. But that kind of gives you that hint that if you do choose to invade a country and you have this sudden cutoff of material, you know, the raw materials coming into your country, well, you might be able to survive for a little while. So that war needs to be done within weeks or months, because if it drags on for 4 years, right now, the war in Ukraine has lasted longer than World War II for Russia, which is absolutely insane. And China realizes that if they're going to take Taiwan, they need to do it quickly, or else they will suffer from sanctions.
You've made a strong argument that Russia has not used nuclear weapon because China has forbidden it. As Beijing does not want to set a precedent ahead of a Taiwan invasion, but if Russia's economy begins to collapse before Ukraine's, which is the goal of a war or attrition, could China lose leverage over Putin? And what happens if Kremlin desperation outweighs fear of Beijing?
What can happen if the Kremlin stops fearing Beijing? That's kind of what you're saying. That's a tough one because China is buying most of their oil. So they kind of have to do whatever China says, right? Because they need that hard currency in order to maintain their operational tempo. So if Russia ever stopped listening to Beijing, and even then, in that case, the use of something like nuclear weapons, which is something Russia loves to threaten, it's still not very likely because Russia would be obliterated if they use nuclear weapons. And even if they use it for, I would say to say a valid reason, such as using a tactical nuclear weapon at a point on the front line to exploit an attack, because this is something Russia used to do. We used to practice it as well. You explode a nuclear weapon in an airburst over a certain section of line, and then you run your people through that because there's not a lot of fallout if you have an airburst explosion. They could do that, but they don't have any troops to support the breakthrough. They don't have any armored vehicles anymore either. Russia is essentially out of tanks. It doesn't mean they have no tanks left, but this means that units are getting 7 tanks instead of 12, right? A tank company might be 7 instead of 12, or 5 instead of 12 for a reinforced platoon. So, yeah, it's very difficult to calculate what Russia would do without China being able to sell their oil to China, because China is such an integral part of their strategy.
You've confidently stated that NATO would defeat Russian forces in the Baltic states within 36 hours due to overwhelming air superiority. However, the war in Ukraine has shown that dense air defense can significantly blunt air power. Are you perhaps overestiming Western aviation ability to quickly suppress Russia's layered air defense? C-400,
No. So I say that because there's only 2 nations in the world that have dedicated SEAD, or suppression of enemy air defenses. And I think I said that we would gain air superiority within 36 hours. Not win. Like, there's no win. We would be able to gain air superiority fairly quickly. And that's because we actually have dedicated aircraft, F-16s, also known as Wild Weasels, that carry suppression of any air defense weapons such as the HARM missile. The Navy also has an electronic warfare aircraft called Growlers. The only other country that has something similar is China. So gaining air superiority over Russian air defenses, it's not trivial, but it's a lot easier for the United States and by extension for NATO than it is for essentially any other country, just because of our dedicated units for suppression of enemy air defenses.
Germany is preparing for a potential Russian attack on NATO within the next 2 or 3 years, which would place the country at the center of allied military and logistical efforts, according to General Gerald Funk in the interview with The Times. Do you believe Russia is actually capable of launching a military operation against Europe, against NATO, against Germany, or is it now so exhausted by the war in Ukraine that such a move is unrealistic?
It would be unrealistic because they just don't have the armored vehicles to do that anymore. And I know people like to say, oh, but what about drones? And the reason Ukraine is the way it is that both sides became static. If Russia were to launch an invasion of Europe, it would be a maneuver conflict, at least for the first couple of days. But Russia just doesn't have the maneuver units to do that, nor do they have the troops to actually man those maneuver units. So it's very difficult to say whether there would be any kind of invasion, because I don't know how Russia would pull that off. They just don't have the troops to do it.
Mm-hmm. You once referenced an older video where you mathematically demonstrated that campaigns selling diapers like Procter and Gamble earn more than major defense contractors, debunking the myth of all-powerful military-industrial complex. Why then do you think the narrative of war for the profits of army manufacturers is so deeply ingrained in the minds of Western voters? Is it primarily the result of Russian propaganda?
Could be, but a lot of it is just, it's easier to think that there's a conspiracy than it is to actually read the yearly reports of these companies. All right. Like most people, they have no idea how much money Boeing actually makes. I believe they're negative $22 million, or I think they're negative $200 million this year. They're in the red. They've been in the red for 2 years because their airplanes keep falling out of the sky and the doors keep blowing open in mid-flight. So with a company like Boeing, that's not a good investment, right? And no matter how much money the U.S. government gets them, it hasn't gotten them out of the red. So I think it's just a shorthand way. Like, people want to believe, they want to blame someone else for their problems. So it's just easier to say, oh, there's wars because of the military-industrial complex. And of course, they never actually look at a financial statement. So I think a lot of it's just being lazy. We look for easy answers, and sometimes there's no easy answers.
Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your brilliant thoughts, analysis, and insights with us. Today's our guest was a SINT analyst, intelligence analyst, cybersecurity expert, YouTuber, content creator, and author Ryan McBeth. And Ryan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.